Hi everyone, Chris from Stone Age Gamer here, and welcome back to Stone Age Countdown. Video games and sequels go hand in hand. 99 times out of 100, if a game is successful, it's gotta get a sequel. Heck, even if it's not so successful, a follow-up may arise. What's fun though is discovering that a game you love was itself a sequel to a game you've never heard of, or that a sequel was made and you had no idea. Sometimes it's because of localization, sometimes it's because it was just released at the wrong time, but sometimes sequels can happen when and where you least expect it. Here are my top 5 secret sequels.
Number 5. Sneaky Snakes. Snake, Rattle, and Roll for NES isn't exactly a hugely popular game in its own right, but I was a big fan when I was a kid. So much so that I even wrote a letter to Nintendo Power asking why they never made a sequel to it. They never wrote me back, but if they had, they probably would have told me that a snaky sequel already existed. It was for the Game Boy, and the reason it presumably slipped or slithered by most people was because the packaging and promotional artwork looked nothing like the first game. Even the name was changed. But this is indeed an honest-to-goodness sequel to Snake, Rattle, and Roll. The music, the graphics, it's all in the exact same style as the NES original. The gameplay, however, is a little bit different. Instead of the isometric, or whatever you call this angle, perspective the NES game is known for, Sneaky Snakes opts for a side-scrolling approach, which was probably for the best on the old dot matrix Game Boy screen. Other than that perspective, though, the gameplay is largely the same. Eat pibbles, grow your tail, jump on evil mushrooms, travel in sewer grates, everything that made the original great was still around. It's ultimately not nearly as good a game, as the side-scrolling perspective and slower gameplay kinda drags the whole thing down a few pegs, but if you're a fan of the NES original, you've gotta try Sneaky Snakes. Number 4. Metal Combat: Falcon's Revenge. Here's another case of a sequel having a name that's not even close to the original. Metal Combat: Falcon's Revenge is a direct follow-up to the Super Scope game BattleClash. Once you know, it's impossible to unsee. The title font is the same, there's a big old robot on the front of the box, but without the word BattleClash there, it's not immediately apparent that it's related, which is a pretty strange marketing choice. BattleClash is a tragically underplayed title. The Super Scope never really took off the way the NES Zapper did, but the few games that were made for the thing were pretty fun, especially BattleClash. If you've never had the pleasure, it's basically like Punch-Out, except with giant robots and guns instead of racial stereotypes and boxing. Not you, Teleroboxer. But if you were to walk into a store at the time and see Metal Combat on the shelf, you'd never know it had anything to do with BattleClash. And the game itself is, unsurprisingly, really cool. Maybe not quite as good as the original in my humble opinion, but the fact that it got a sequel at all is kinda crazy, so I'm certainly not one to complain. It's got a ton of new robots to blow up, a larger charge meter for more powerful shots, and even a little voice acting at the beginning of the game.
1993, Nintendo presents.
More people should play with the Super Scope in these games. They're super fun. Number 3. Pha Xanadu. Pha Xanadu is one of those games I assume a lot of kids like me only knew about because of the old Now You're Playing with Power posters. The screenshots made it look like a Zelda 2 style adventure. It had a really enticing box art and an ultra cool name, Faxanadu. It just sounded like a cool mystical place or something. Funny thing about that cool name though, I'm pretty sure it's not pronounced like I always thought it was. Turns out Faxanadu is a sort of remake sequel spin-off from a game called Xanadu for Japanese PCs, and this is sort of a special Famicom version of that game. Put those words Famicom and Xanadu together and you get the name, Pha Xanadu. Doesn't really roll off the tongue like Faxanadu does, but it's a pretty fascinating bit of history. Weirder still is that Xanadu itself is a spin-off from the Japanese series Dragon Slayer, so Pha Xanadu is a spin-off of a spin-off, which is bananas! Like Pha Xanadu, Xanadu is a side-scroller with RPG elements. Unlike Pha Xanadu, though, there really isn't any jumping or direct combat. When you battle in Xanadu, the game brings you to a different screen, sort of like the battle sequences in early Final Fantasy games. Except the combat isn't menu-based. You sort of run into the enemies until they die, kind of like in the East games, or Wise games, or how the heck do you pronounce that one? Anyway, it's pretty different from Pha Xanadu, but you can definitely see the lineage. As for Pha Xanadu itself, well, that game's great. That's why it's on the list. Number 2. The Guardian Legend. The Guardian Legend is an awesome game, and one of the coolest concepts on the NES. For those who don't know, it's part vertical scrolling shooter and part top-down action adventure game. It looks and sounds absolutely brilliant, and it's held up remarkably well. What we here in the US didn't know at the time was that Guardian Legend was not a completely original game. It was in fact a sequel to a game called Guardic for MSX, a home computer that wasn't exactly popular over here in the States. To be fair, Guardic is a cool game, but it's got absolutely nothing on the Guardian Legend. For starters, it's a single-screen top-down shooter, and well, that's about it. No adventure elements besides some branching paths between stages, no transforming ship that I know of, no mysterious story, nothing. But even though it doesn't quite manage to live up to the excellence sent by its superior sequel, Guardic is a pretty fascinating piece of history. Back to the Guardian Legend, even without the fantastic secret lineage, it's without a doubt one of the coolest games on the NES, and has more than earned its cult following. Number 1. The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang. This game rules. It's a Zelda-style adventure about a vampire who eats tomatoes instead of drinking blood and fights garlic monsters. There's a whole mythology included that made me feel like I was playing some sort of cartoon adaptation. The game looks, sounds, and plays amazingly. My only real gripe I have with the game is that it's too darn short. Fortunately, there is more of it out there in the world. Sort of. Spike McFang is actually the second of 2 games that take place in this world, the first being Makai Prince Dorobachan for a PC Engine. Unlike Spike McFang, the PC Engine game is a side-scrolling platformer, and it's a pretty cool one at that. Like its sequel, it's all manner of weird. You toss tomatoes, ring bells, and jump around in very colorful worlds full of expressive characters. And overall, it isn't quite as good as Spike McFang, but it's got some really strong Mr. Gimmick or Bonk's Adventure vibes going on, which is definitely not a bad thing. Spike McFang, though, outclasses it in just about every way, and is definitely worth seeking out if you like these kinds of games, and is well deserving of the top spot.
Now, you've probably noticed a couple of big names we're missing from this list. For example, Earthbound, aka Mother 2, is the sequel to Mother. Secret of Mana, aka Seiken Densetsu 2, is the sequel to Seiken Densetsu, aka The Final Fantasy Adventure. These games are fantastic, but they didn't make the list because while at the time of their release, their lineage was still shrouded in mystery, today the fact that these titles are chapters in their own series is more or less common knowledge, and well, that's not what we were going for. That's not a secret! Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked what you saw here today, please comment, like, subscribe, and let us know what you think. Are there secret sequels that I missed? Was any of this news to you? But let us know, because we always love hearing from folks in the comments, so don't hesitate to sound off. That's it. Thanks again, everybody. On behalf of all of us here at Stone Age Gamer, keep playing games.